Hello and welcome to the Farm.One podcast, coming to you from our vertical farm here in Brooklyn. We want to use this podcast to help you to discover New York food stories and really become more thoughtful about your food. My name's Rob Lang. I'm the CEO and founder at FarmOne, and this is actually the first time that we film in our new farm in Brooklyn. We're in Prospect Heights. We started building this farm a couple of months ago, and actually the person who's joining me, Vanessa Rosetto, she was actually here at our opening ceremony back in June, so I'm really happy to welcome you back.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and to tell you a little bit about Vanessa, she's recognized by Essence Magazine as one of the 5 nutritionists who will change the way you think about your food. Very prestigious. And she's a registered dietitian. She has over 9 years of experience. She also has a marketing, master's in marketing, right? Yeah. As well. And she's the director of NYU's Dietetic Internship Program. And that's a program where we've actually had several folks come through FarmOne and be really helpful to us. You've got some great people coming through that program. And overall, I think her mission is really to get New Yorkers and other folks to think about their food and think about how they can use food to be more healthy and stay healthy. And so, welcome, Vanessa.
Thanks for having me. I feel so special. I'm the first one.
Yeah, what's it like to be back here in the farm? I mean, last time you were here, it was
just like a blank space.
Yeah.
So I'm very impressed in such a short amount of time.
Yeah.
It is very lush and green and really nice, and I've been able to taste a couple of things, so that's exciting. It's fun.
Okay, well, good. And so, you know, you strike me as someone who's clearly, like, you love talking about food, but you started off your career in marketing, right? So what caused that shift for you?
Yeah, so I'm my parents' biggest disappointment because I'm not a doctor. We talk about that all the time. This is like the typical like immigrant story. My mom is from Haiti. My dad is from Spain. So I actually went to college and was a biology major to start, but then I was like, I don't really want to work that hard. So I decided to shift to history, which my parents are still upset about. And then afterwards, I was like, oh, I'm just going to get a degree in marketing. That feels like, sure. So I did that. I worked in marketing, but I always was interested in science. And after college, I had gained 50 pounds because I was just eating, right? I never really had any kind of like emotional ties to food per se, but my mother was always making my meals. And so then when I got to school, I was just eating whatever was given to me. And so I really didn't understand. Of course, when I moved back home and I went back to eating my mom's food, I lost all this weight. I didn't really know how. So I went and met with a registered dietitian, and I felt like, oh, this is so interesting, right? Because I'm interested in food, but I'm also still interested in science. And this sort of marries the two, and sort of how I got here.
Amazing. Okay. And just to clarify some terminology, right? Some people get confused, like dietitian, nutritionist, health coach. Like, can you describe like what those terms mean and what people should think?
Yeah. So a registered dietitian has to do 1,200 hours. They have to be clinically supervised. They have to take an exam. And so that's sort of the gold standard, right? That's really what you want, especially if you have some kind of chronic condition or illness. Even if you're really confused about food, they are educated to educate you about food and how it affects your bodies. Health coaches and nutritionists are limited because they don't understand that science piece, which is really the integral piece that can help bring everything together. So there's definitely use for them, but if you are really looking for something that is going to give you like longevity and really make things clearer for you, you want to go with a registered dietitian.
And especially now, right, on TikTok, Instagram, I feel like everything I see, there's some, random dietary advice. How do you think about that stuff that you see on social media?
It's so interesting because bless social media, right? It's given us this platform. And, I would be remiss to not note the fact that, like, yes, I am verified and people do consider me an influencer in the space. So you can trust me, right? And that's good. But then there's all those people out there that are telling you, like the water challenge, or people call me and they're like, did you hear this TikTok thing? I'm like, I have 2 small children and a job. I can't spend a lot of time on TikTok. So it's interesting, but please look at these things with a discerning eye. Reach out to people that you might think are credible. Even if you could just do a Google search, you will be able to see, like, there are some studies out there. Maybe this isn't the best thing that I need to do, and sort of make your decisions from there. But don't take what you see on TikTok or Instagram as gospel.
Probably a good good piece of advice in general.
In general, anything.
So tell me more about the work that you do at NYU.
Yeah, so I actually, I worked in like all facets of nutrition for a really long time, and then I decided to just have a private practice. So I have a private practice still to this day. But the director who had been there for 25 years was promoted to be a dean, and she called me and was like, I got promoted. And I'm like, great, good for you. And she was like, no, so can you take over my job? I was like, oh, wow, cool. So now I basically curate their experience, right? I make sure they get into the right hospital placement, I mentor them, I teach them how to be good dietitians, and all the things in between. It's really fun and exciting. It's important to mentor students through this space, which is really cluttered and it's hard to navigate through, and you don't know what's what, and also you don't realize that you can do a lot of different things. Yeah. So historically, a dietitian wouldn't think like, oh, I can go work on a farm, right? Like they wouldn't think like, what is the value that I can offer? And so being able to mentor them through that, because I do have that marketing background and then I understand the nutrition, is a really fun thing to do.
Yeah. That sounds great. And so what do you think the big sort of problems and opportunities that the students that you work with are going to experience when they enter workforce after your program?
Yeah, the nutrition space is super fragmented, and so that's problem number one. Also, working in the hospital is a really great place to get a lot of knowledge and get yourself comfortable with working with all different kinds of people. So I was trained at Mount Sinai. Mount Sinai is an interesting place. The juxtaposition of placement, it's across the street from a housing project. I can tell you all the celebrities that I personally saw on my floors and all the people in between. So it just gets you in that repetition, and it's a teaching hospital, so you'll learn a lot. But that can't be your last stop because there's no real room for growth. Right. So you need to be able to pivot and think like, okay, where are people eating? Where can I make myself useful? What are the things that I'm most interested in? I like to take time to talk with students and ask them those questions, and then come up with a plan of like what's most exciting to them, and then kind of go from there.
Very cool, very cool. And if you had like 1 minute to tell me how to be a good dietitian, what kind of advice might you give?
Well, I always tell people you have to listen to the patient or the client. It's not really about you or what works for you. You have to hear what they're saying. And the best example I have is I was on transplant service. I had a patient from Bangladesh. Apparently, a very common breakfast is grilled grapefruit. He had just had a transplant. You can't have high citrus. It's going to interact with the medication that you have to take for the rest of your life. And I was like, well, no, you just cannot have that. This man was 65 years old. And I didn't think, wait, should I go back to the pharmacist and ask, can we do something? Which we could, and we were able to adjust the medication, right? I wasn't listening to him. I just had my own agenda. So I think everybody can be healthy no matter where they come from or what their general diet looks like. You just have to work with that person.
Yeah, okay. And everyone's got different backgrounds and everyone's got different food cultures, right? So tell me about your family growing up and food and what it meant to you.
Growing up, like I always say this, like all my American friends, like they bring like wine or like alcohol. It's like weird, like for my family, it's like we bring food. Like everything centers around food. Like the kitchen is where everybody hangs out. This is what we do all the time. If you're not eating, like what is it that you're even doing? I ate every meal at home because my mom and my aunts are really good cooks. And so like, it's just what we did. I used to always be like, oh my God, you get pizza on Fridays? You're so lucky. It was like unheard of. But just food was like how we connect. And one aunt is always trying to outdo the other aunt.
Oh, with the cooking.
With the cooking, okay. Yeah. And my husband's Italian, and so he's never really like experienced this, right? So and they always want to like please him. So they'll be like, Michael, I made rice and beans for you. And then my aunt will call my dad and be like, oh, I heard Vanessa and the kids and Michael, tell them to stop by my house. She's like, I made you rice and beans. So we'll come home with like 6 things of rice and beans. And my children go to school with thermoses of like rice and beans and like plantains. And like, so they're not eating like the regular, peanut butter and jelly sandwich, or that is. I feel really grateful for that. I know good food. The first time I ever had mac and cheese, my roommate in college was making it in a crock pot. And I was like, your mother doesn't love you. Like, who makes this? But food is super important to my family. Like, you can't. Like, my parents come over and they're like, where's the food? I'm like, what do you want? They're like, you don't just have food on the stove.
And I think, certainly in my family, right, our food habits and the foods that we eat has changed dramatically since when I was a kid. I grew up in the UK, not known in the 80s and 90s for great food culture.
Yeah.
And like sort of exciting food for us. I remember the first time I ate Thai food, for instance, and I was probably like 12 or 13 years old, Whereas now I think in cities like New York, we've got so much access to different food from different cultures. How do you think like your family and your food choices have changed over time?
Yeah, I will say that growing up, I wasn't exposed to a ton of food that was outside of this like Spanish Haitian culture. There was American food, and then there was the traditional food that my mom and my aunts and my parents made. But like I didn't have sushi until I was like 22 years old because my parents don't eat sushi. So that's that. It wasn't really accessible to me. But yeah, to your point, like with the advent of the internet and Instagram, and you can like look at beautiful food all day long and try different recipes and everything. There's so much access that then maybe when you are brought up in a family like yours or mine, where still like you are experiencing different kinds of food that's not like the traditional of where you are, then you are more adventurous to try other things.
Yeah, totally. And, a lot of the times now with nutrition and diet, people talk about plant-based diets, right? What's your position on plant-based diets, and how has your thinking kind of evolved over the past 10 years around?
Yeah, it's just like not something that we talked about, right? Like vegetables are gross. Like your mother boiled Brussels sprouts. They had a weird smell. So like, of course you didn't eat them. It was like a chore. But vegetables are delicious, and you can make them in such a fun way. Roasting them, you can, I get my kids to help me every Sunday. We go to the supermarket, we buy carrots and cucumbers and celery and red bell peppers, and they help chop them up, and we put them in a container, and that's the place for them to grab vegetables. So that's their first taste of vegetables. They're not boiled down and they're not flavorless. And so from there, they're not afraid when, my Farm.One greens come. They're like, okay, I'll try that, right? Because I've already been trying this. I think you just have to just be more open and like think of different ways. But plant-based is interesting because it's like the general PSA. I always say, like, if you told women they could drink while they were pregnant, they would drink every day. And it's probably okay to have like one glass of wine, but because we can't trust people, this is the same thing here, right? And so the plant-based thing is, you should have plants. No one is disputing this. Definitely eat them at lunch and dinner, and if you can put them in breakfast, that's really good too. But it doesn't have to be this all or nothing thing, right? Like, I could have oatmeal. I was describing to them earlier, like oatmeal and like fruit with my breakfast, and then I could have, I don't know, like tofu and like greens for lunch, and then maybe at dinner time I'm gonna have chicken and also vegetables, and I had snacks that were fruit and veggies as well. And so most of the meals were plant-based, but nothing bad happened because I also ate chicken. Like, you gotta balance it out.
Yeah. And how do you think, what do you think about all these like plant-based meat alternatives and plant-based dairy products as well? Because we're seeing an explosion of these products on the market right now.
Yeah.
What's your opinion?
I think that they're full of processing and chemicals, and cashews probably don't become cheese very easily. So is there any difference between you eating cashew cheese versus me eating an organic flank steak? Yes, I'm probably better off, right? But if you're eating all of this super processed food all the time, then is there any benefit really?
And are you seeing in your practice like people buying into these foods, for instance? Like what's out there? What are people sort of thinking and trying?
They just think if it says organic, if it's plant-based, if it's vegan, then it automatically is good. It's good to go. Yeah. There's no discernment there, and I don't blame people because it's pretty confusing.
Right.
You don't know what to do.
Yeah. So what do you tell them?
I'm like, guys, you have to. First of all, nothing is a free food. So you can't just say, like, I'm going to eat tofu every single day. Like, do we know about tofu? How does it affect your body? Like, what is your family history? Like, we need to vary our food. That is the whole point. But yes, of course, less processed, more vegetables, those help us. But that doesn't mean we have to stay away from meat. People who eat meat are not healthy, right? It's okay. Like, include all the things.
Right.
But always have vegetables. Yeah, but I always say you have to have a vegetable at lunch and you always have to have a vegetable at dinner. That's minimum.
Sure.
And then if you want to put it at breakfast, if you want to have it as your snacks, that's good too. But like, I didn't know that meant that I was now like plant-based because I'm eating mostly.
Okay. Yeah, totally. And so, food access is one of the things that does affect diet pretty severely. Can you describe to people like how that works and what you're seeing out there?
Yeah, people, it's funny. I think that dietitians always have this like kind of, or for historically have been like thought to be like pretty elite in the way that they disseminate the information, like have organic dairy. And it's like, okay, well, if I live in a place that I don't have access and there's Yoplait and, you know, red soda and Snickers, and a mother goes into the store and gets the Yoplait for their kid, is she doing the kid a disservice? No, there's protein there, there's calcium, and there's good habits that are forming because we're creating that flavor profile, right? The child will be like, oh, 10 years from now, I'll try Siggy's because I used to have Yoplait, right? Like that's the kind of thing we have to like build upon and think about. And no, like not everybody has access to beautiful organic greens, but there are different ways to get greens in, right? There's nothing wrong with having frozen vegetables. They are allowed to ripen and then they're flash frozen and there's minimal processing. And so you can have that. You can have, you know, fruits that aren't necessarily organic. Like, why does a banana need to be organic? So people just need to we have to do a better job at educating people so that they understand that even though they have limited funds or maybe even limited access, there are plenty of ideas out there for them where they can eat healthfully.
Right, great. And how do you see these kind of issues, perception and food access in communities of color versus other folks around the country? And what's your sense of how people are affected differently in their communities?
Yeah, I went to Fordham in the Bronx, and, you know, we had one supermarket, it was called Associated, and, you know, whatever you got on the Sunday when you went grocery shopping was what you got, and nothing was ever consistent. And there's White Castle, there's, you know, a million pizza places, there's McDonald's, there's Burger King, there's Popeyes. And then I think about like where I grew up, where there's, you know, a Fairway, and there are, you know, farmers markets, and, you know, there's Costco, and there's access. And so that's a miss on our part, right? We need to be doing more to make sure that just because you are in an affluent community doesn't mean that we have to be loading you with strip malls full of fast food.
Right. And how has COVID, you know, changed that picture over the past, I keep thinking it's 18 months, it's turning into 2 years rapidly. Like, how does that change the picture in terms of diet and health?
Yeah, I mean, it's like twofold, right? People who have a lot have had a lot. And so maybe they're like drinking and eating their feelings and calling me because they've gained so much weight. And then on the other end are like the children, for example, who the only meals that they got were when they went to school. And on Fridays they would take bags home, and now they weren't eating. And it was very limited. And, you know, there are people out there that were doing the best that they could to help them. But you don't think, like, I think about how Gwyneth Paltrow, like her biggest flex during COVID was like, I had to eat gluten. And it's like, where are your PR people? Do you have somebody to help you through this? Like, you know, so disconnected from like actually what happens in the world. I think it's our job as professionals to help any way we can. So whether that's just me getting on platforms saying like, hey, this is what you can do with like cans of things in your house, like just giving people ideas so they could say, oh, okay, that's me. I see myself and I can do that really quickly. Or also just like working with different organizations to give what we can so that people can be helped.
Absolutely. And so what do you think are some positive changes that we're seeing in terms of people's understanding about diet and health?
Yeah, I think because of social media, people have access, right? So you can learn whatever you want to learn. There is somebody out there that you can hang your hat on. There's this one dietitian PhD, his name is Kevin Klatt, and he is in Texas, and he's amazing, and he takes all the research and he breaks it down in English, and it's awesome. So you could follow somebody like that and say, I read this article here, but this guy's talking about it in this way. And I think that is like the best thing that's come out of this whole social media situation.
And so I want to ask you, Vanessa, do you have any nutrition success stories that you love thinking about?
Yeah, I think about this one couple. They found me because the husband had type 2 diabetes and they have a small child. And they were going to their primary care physician and they weren't seeing any change. Like his blood sugars were hanging out around 200, and for people who don't know, like it should be 100. Like, right, 80 to 100 is good, right? Okay. And a normal A1C is anything below 5.7, and his was about 8.
What's A1C?
It's the amount of blood glucose, like, so the sugar in your blood over 3 months, right?
I didn't know.
Yeah, no, it's okay. It's okay. Yeah, I'm always like, who do I need? So they were really frustrated, and they were going vegan. They didn't know what to do. There's so much noise. Can you help me? They read about me and they're like, can you help? And I was like, sure. And I always think about this story because it was very obvious that he he's not a doctor or a lawyer, but he cares about his health, and his wife cares about his health. And so just because he doesn't look the part, he's trying. So why were we dismissing him? Right? That's like, nobody is doing their job here. So I took this guy in like 9 months, dropped him 30 pounds. His A1C is normal. So now he's like 5.6. His blood sugar is, 90, like normal. And he's like, you saved my life. I am going to see my daughter grow up. And I'm like, yeah, but he was high functioning and willing to do the work. Someone just had to teach him.
That's great.
Yeah, it makes me feel good every time I tell that story. He's a good guy. Yeah, they're good people.
I think when you change your diet or when people make lifestyle changes, right, I think sometimes you can have unintended consequences that are actually really positive. Like, do you have examples where that might have happened?
Yeah, it actually happened to me over this last year. I had someone who, like, saying that you're an alcoholic is like self-diagnosis, right? No one can tell you that. But like, from their behaviors and the things that they were doing, we would talk about the alcohol and like, okay, so you're doing all the things with regards to your food, but the alcohol is a barrier, and it seems that you are using it as a crutch. Like, we would just kind of have this conversation over and over again. So now the person is like 8 months sober and feeling really good. And that wasn't me saying like, you're an alcoholic. That was just this self-reflection, right? Like, you're doing all this work and we're doing all this stuff, these things to change our health and do better for ourselves, but there's this one thing that I can't seem to give up. Like, why is that? A lot of like introspection and having success. So that made me feel happy.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah.
And I think like sometimes, people think lifestyle change is just about knowing the facts, but I think it's also about like circumstance and willingness.
Right.
And
Right.
what's your perception on that?
Yeah, like people, the stages of change, right? You're contemplative and action, and you vacillate between the two all the time, and that's very normal. And I think people feel some kind of guilt if they don't like hit it hard and do it right away. But that's okay. To your point, there's all these circumstances that are happening. Like, life is happening, and just because something doesn't necessarily bother you, it can bother your partner, for example. So you have to respect that and feel okay working people through that.
Yeah. And how do you think that most people sort of make the decision to come and see someone like you? What are some triggering things where that might happen?
Well, going to the doctor and someone telling you like the weight went up from the last time, like a significant amount, or there are lab values that are out of range. Maybe also you don't feel that great, so perhaps you have joint issues, or maybe you have GI issues, and you've gone to the doctor and that hasn't worked. And like, a lot of times people are just curious. They're like, hey, I don't really know about food that much, and I'm really trying to take better control of my health, and I think it starts with food, so can you just help me through that? And sometimes it's that simple.
Yeah. And I know that, certainly in my family, right, my mom and I have pretty similar diets, and we do a lot of cooking in the family, whereas, my sister and my dad are more like, stuck in the particular way of doing things. How do you see that dynamic play out in families and across generations?
Yeah, well, I mean, generationally, you can't tell older people anything. Like, this is the food, like, because, if you think about my mother, who's like, you don't like that? You have an allergy? She's like, in my third world country, nobody has allergies because there's no food. And my mom talks about how in Haiti, like, wealth and poverty exist together, simultaneous, side by side. So it's very in your face. So they don't have those same luxuries. So as far as my mom is concerned, you just get what you get and you don't get upset. Like, how do you have the nerve to say you don't like something? And my husband's family is that they are kind of like the same in that way. But for me, my thing is, you have to try it first. If you don't like it, then you don't have to eat it, but you have to at least try it.
Yeah, I read this piece of research that suggests you often have to try something like 7 times before you can really tell.
More like 16 times.
16 times.
Yeah. Before you really know if you really like something.
Yeah.
And you think about kids, like, their taste buds are more bitter. So when people are like, how come my kid doesn't want to eat these things? It's like, well, because their palate is just not like elevated enough. You got to give them some time. So it's like I tell my kids, you have to eat a vegetable every day at lunch and dinner. Find the one that you like and just eat it. It's like, okay, fine. So we've got like the 4 that we like and we eat them, and that's fine. Yeah. Because they have to be trained in that flavor so that they get used to it and will be willing to try other things.
Yeah. And how do you, because I think as parents, right, like looking after kids and then introducing them to foods that you kind of want them to like, Do you have any general advice for parents on how to navigate that? Because it's super tricky.
Yeah, so right now, everyone's talking about the division, intuitive eating. And intuitive eating comes from eating competence, and the woman's name is Ellen Satter, and she says that your job is the division of responsibility. So we prepare the food, and we provide the food, and we don't comment on that. And so when you want your kid to try roasted Brussels sprouts, you have to provide the food that your child identifies as safe, and then provide that food, and you just keep providing it. And if the kid picks it up, if the kid licks it, if the kid smells it, that's a win. Eventually they will eat it. But also, how do you talk about food with your kid? What are the types of foods your kid is allowed to eat? So like my kids can eat candy whenever they want. They never eat it. Only on Halloween. I'm like, eat all the candy you want. So my daughter is always like, oh my gosh, my stomach hurts, and like doesn't eat candy for a year. My son is like, this is amazing. So then I'll be like, okay, well, you can only have one candy per day. But it's there and it's easily accessible, because sometimes when they want a snack and they ask for chips, they have it. And sometimes I tell them they need to go get a piece of fruit. And so because it's always there and nothing is forbidden, they get pretty good at like self-regulating. So you don't need to hide the food. You need to trick them. They will eat it eventually. You just have to keep providing it.
Yeah. And what do you think the role of like schools and education should be around food?
I tell this all the time to people. I pay for my kids to go to school, and they sell juice as like a snack. And I told the principal the other day, I was like, you should be arrested, because that is just like unconscionable. Like the fact that you would sell juice at the school is ridiculous. There's an obesity epidemic with children that's so bad. For whatever reason, they're not providing food. They don't think about it. They don't understand, like, work with purveyors. Like, we can't provide vegetables because they're too expensive. I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to donate a tower garden to every single class, and then the kids can grow their own vegetables. No, we can't do that because someone has to teach the curriculum. Great. I'm going to come teach about food. No, we can't do that. And then I think, I pay for my kid to go to this school. What happens to the kids who go to public school and we're providing them their only meals for the day? Like nobody thinks about that because it's not important on the budget line. And I don't know what the answer is to make that change. I just know it's very complicated and sometimes depressing.
Yeah, for sure. And if you think about New York City, right, we've got a bunch of urban farms now, right? So we're sitting inside one, but also, there's smallholds growing mushrooms. We've got Oko Farms, amazing aquaponic farm. We've even got Harlem Grown, which grows specifically around kids and education. We've got Teams for Food Justice, which builds farms in schools. How do you think farms in general and like visibility and transparency about our food supply can kind of help kids understand about food?
Yeah, so kids are like little narcissists and they want to be like in control, and they want to be in control, right? And they want to be the one that produced. So if you just gave them a hand in this, they would love it. So getting little kids to grow their own fruits and vegetables, then they will eat it because they'll say, I made this. Yeah. I think we do kids a disservice. We don't value them because we're always trying to push something on them. We don't see them as human beings. And I'm not suggesting that we defer to the children all the time, but give them an opportunity to say that they like something or don't like something. I don't like to eat oatmeal every day, so why does my kid have to eat the oatmeal every day? They're allowed to have preference. It's okay. Yeah. But I think there's such a huge opportunity there, because wouldn't you like to come into my kid's school and like provide like some sort of vertical farm for them, and then they could grow their own food and be like amazing and like actually probably more cost effective and less taxing on the U.S. healthcare system in the end.
Yeah. I mean, I think it seems like the food in schools overall, obviously Michelle Obama was trying to look into this several years ago. I think the situation has improved a bit, but there seems to be a long way to go. Yeah. And certainly, I remember back in school, we had school lunches, which was kind of like roast beef that had been cooked for 3 hours and potatoes.
And frozen pizzas.
Yeah, well, we didn't get that in the UK. That would have been exotic.
That would have blown your mind.
Yeah. We've got sort of Yorkshire pudding that had deflated back down to a sort of mush. But oh well, those were the days.
But England has good food now.
It does now. And I really credit, for instance, Jamie Oliver was big in that in terms of like making food kind of fun and exciting. And now we've just got like an explosion of great food.
Yeah, one of my best friends is English, and he's like not adventurous with food, and so I'm like, I see. And he's like almost 50, and he's like, growing up we didn't have a lot. I'm like, got it.
Yeah, I was lucky enough to kind of be there just when it was getting better, I think, but definitely it did deserve its reputation, but now it's okay. Yeah. And so what are your hopes really for the future of food and education in New York City?
I just want people to know that food and health and wellness is for them, no matter like what they look like, what the color of their skin, socioeconomic class. Like there is a way for you to have control over your health and live like a healthy lifestyle without breaking your bank. It's possible.
Yeah, and so you're doing some things right now which are a little bit unusual in the world of dietitians.
Yeah. So I have a private practice called Kalina Health. I founded it with another RD, Tamar Samuels, and hopefully we get some funding and we'll add a tech layer and be a little bit more efficient. Because historically, RD practices are never very profitable, so people don't really do them, or they don't do them well. We have been doing it well, but we need that funding to kind of, add that tech layer and make it better and compete in that digital space. But we take insurance. We take most commercial insurances and Medicaid. Medicare is a little tricky because they don't want anyone on their platforms, but that's a different story. So like you can come see us, right? And that's just like one way for, at least for me, that I'm able to make this accessible to other people.
And tell me more about Kalina Health and the plans you've got.
Yeah, we've got big plans. We're gonna compete with all the people, but like right now we have 18 dietitians. This time last year we only had 4, so it just kind of grew and got bigger and bigger. I think it's the fact that we talk about nutrition in a different way. We're very relatable. There's somebody for everybody, and it's the accountability piece we know, right? Like Nooms and Weight Watchers of the world, no, take a picture of your food and some health coach, somebody's gonna tell you. But it's that science and that personalization that is important, and that's what we do, and we do it really well. So I'm very proud of that.
So what's it like having a startup and being a dietitian at the same time and working with NYU?
It's mental. I haven't slept in like 2 weeks.
Okay.
Sometimes, like last night, I woke up in the middle of the night and my husband and the dog are laying in the bed like snoring, and I'm like, everybody go to sleep.
I'm surprisingly familiar with that feeling.
Yes.
It's my wife and my dog.
And we got the dog during quarantine. Our dog of 14 years died, and so then we got this new dog because my husband would be like literally crying. So we got Freddie, and every time I see Freddie, I think to myself like, Marley wouldn't have the nerve. Like Marley it was like a little Yorkie and like slept in a little corner, and Freddie is like the king.
Taking over.
Yeah, it takes over. So they sleep peacefully. My children sleep in 2 minutes. I send them to bed and they pass out like mid-sentence, and I'm up. Hopefully.
Hopefully you'll get some sleep soon. Yeah, good.
Yeah.
Well, and how can people find you online if they want to follow you?
Yeah, KalinaHealth.com, Vanessa Rosetto RD, or Kalina Health on Instagram, and come check us out.
And any final thoughts, messages that you want to send out into the universe for our members and our viewers?
This farm is amazing. Also come and check it out because the lighting is good for any selfie that you would like to take. Yes. But you're doing really good work here, and I'm grateful to be part of it. I'm grateful to send students here, so thank you. And thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thanks, Vanessa.
Yeah, so good.
It's great to chat with you.
So fun.
Yeah, well, good. Well, so I hope you enjoyed this episode. Vanessa is also going to be picking some varieties that are going to end up in your box pretty soon. And there might be opportunities to talk to Vanessa in a few months' time when we might be able to do events in this space. There's lots of exciting things coming up. No specific timeline yet. But yeah, each week or each month we're going to feature stories like this about food and how to be thoughtful about your food. And I'm looking forward to it. Thanks for joining us today. Thank you, Vanessa. Good to talk to you as always.